Lord God, our Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you for gathering us together as your people, as you do not only week in, week out, but on a pretty regular basis from day to day. Thank you for gathering us, especially tonight as we're spending time in your Word and taking a look at where your Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We pray that you would bless our study of Scripture and the land that you once gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Bless our time together that we might learn and grow in our faith and grow closer to you in all things. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So right off the bat, I have to apologize. You're still getting the medium maps. The large maps are being mounted. I was told it would be 2 weeks, at most, more likely 2 days, and today has been 3 weeks that they've had the maps and still have not finished. So this is medium map, we'll deal with it. I figure last week was no maps, this week's medium, so next week it's just going to hit its completion there. So we're going to start with a quote from this guy. His name is Bartle Pixner. He's French, so I'm sure it's pronounced a different way. But he's was a Benedictine monk that lived in Israel, and he has a quote here that pretty sure he's citing Jerome from back in the day. But in any case, he writes, 5 Gospels record the life of Jesus. 4 you will find in books, and 1 you will find in the land they call holy. Read the 5th Gospel, and the world of the 4 will open to you. He says this is in many ways a gospel. Now, we're a little bit hesitant to call the land a gospel, and yet the gospel of Jesus was written on this land. This is where Jesus came, lived, died, rose again. At one point in his life when he was still a child, his family went to Egypt, just to the west down here. However, the rest of Jesus' entire life and earthly ministry took place on this map. So if we're trying to understand how Jesus interacted with those around him, why he went, where he went, what he was dealing with along the way, it's helpful for us to get a picture of the playing board, so to speak, the map that all of these events took place on. Israel is, it's an interesting place. It's situated in a very distinct point on the world's map, quite frankly. There's a number of scholars that call this chunk of territory in particular the land between. To get to anywhere in the ancient world, especially on an international level, you got to go through Israel. Egypt's down here. If they want to trade with what's now Turkey or the rest of Europe, they got to go through this territory. If they want to go from anywhere in Africa to Assyria, Babylon, Persia, they got to go through this territory. The land of Israel is uniquely situated to be a hub, a center of really the ancient world. The connection point between Africa and Asia, between Europe and Asia and Africa, it's just kind of this niche little corner in the world. This map that we'll be looking at least the big one here, is laid out a little differently. It's not the north is up. In this one, it's east is up, which can be confusing.
That's bothering me a little.
That's bothering you? So this is laid out in historically the more traditional way. This is an oriented map. East is the Orient, and so maps used to be north is, well, not north. East was the Orient. You would orient your maps that way. Practically speaking, this is really helpful for Israel, which is a very narrow country, east to west, but it is very long north to south. And with this medium map, I probably could put it the normal way, but when we've got the big one, that's 8-10 feet in the air. I'm tall, but not that tall. So it's helpful to go wide. It may take a week or two of working with this, but it does end up being a very helpful way to go about this. There's a lot of things we could talk about here. Probably before we jump into just walking through the geography here, giving us just a baseline for what we're dealing with here, I should ask, are there any questions or thoughts on what we've talked about so far, just preparing for land of Israel stuff?
What's the name of that? What's that? Between Gilead and Samaria to the left there. What is that?
This little word right here?
The big word there. Oh, to the
Galilee.
left.
Galilee? Yeah, Galilee.
I thought Galilee was the lake.
It is the Sea of Galilee, but this is the area of Galilee. Yeah.
It's like Lake Cadillac.
Yeah. Like Lake Cadillac is in Cadillac. And in fact, that plays out with Galilee as well. In the New Testament, sometimes you'll hear the Sea of Galilee called the Sea of Tiberias. Tiberias is a little city just right here on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. Shortly before Jesus' day, one of the Herods, one of Herod the Great's sons, decided he wanted to build up a city right along the coast of the Sea of Galilee. He called it Tiberias, after Tiberius Caesar. No better way to get in the Caesar's good favors than name a town after him. So the sea sometimes is called the Sea of Tiberias. Cadillac, this Lake Cadillac, same sort of thing. Yeah. So the general pattern of how we are going to work through this map in a somewhat logically structured way, it's not completely logical, but at least it makes sense in my mind. We are generally going to be working north to south, so on your papers it's top to bottom. But there are going to be places that we're going to need to go west to east. On this map is down to up. I know it's a lot, but it helps to kind of, at least in my mind, compartmentalize chunks of territory and look at how it plays out and how it does affect things and how it all is tied together. Does that make enough sense to get us started?
So this is sideways?
Yes. Left is north. Yeah. So take the map that you have here and turn it sideways, and that's the map. Now, space-wise, you've got north-south. This is what you're used to seeing, so that's what I printed for you. But on our big map here, we're going a different direction here. So, yes, sir?
I think I've seen that today's population of Israel is like 7 million. Does that sound right?
That sounds about right, yeah.
Have you seen any data about what the population of the equivalent territory was at the time of Jesus?
I have not. I'm sure people have done the math on that and figured it all out. I know Jerusalem, I've heard numbers of Jerusalem during times of the Passover, different estimates of how many people would come and take part in things, and ancient census data and population numbers are really hard to gauge, and depending on who you talk to, you get a different number. I've heard that Jerusalem itself in the time of Jesus was maybe 100,000, and that during the Passover it would swell to over 1 million. Now, again, I'm not sure how accurate those numbers are, but that was the scope there. But yeah, I don't have ancient populations right off the top of my head.
I'm going to Google and see what I get.
All right.
500,000 to 600,000.
500,000 to 600,000, yeah. That squares with that estimate, I would say, with Jerusalem and the rest of it. Very good. So, start on the top of your map, the far north of Israel. We've got this chunk of territory just labeled Galilee. This is the land that is to the west of the Sea of Galilee, and you can really split it up into two chunks here. This northernmost chunk is sometimes called Upper Galilee, and then the stuff that's immediately west of the Sea of Galilee is called Lower Galilee. Upper and lower, because the stuff further north is higher in elevation. And as you move south, so you're immediately west now of the Sea of Galilee, the hills drop. There's not a whole lot that happens in Upper Galilee in really anywhere in the Bible. This is a very mountainous region. It's very hard to pass through, and there's not a whole lot that really ever takes place here. There's some, later on, some crusade stuff that passes through here. There's just a random assortment of things here and there, but for our purposes, Upper Galilee exists, and it exists as a block, as a natural line of defense between the rest of the population in the Sea of Galilee and some other enemies that are nearby. We'll deal with that a little bit later. We're going to focus, though, for a moment here on this lower Galilee. You can see on the bigger map and a little bit on the map that you have as well. Coming off of the Sea of Galilee, if you go west from the Sea of Galilee, you've got a series of mountain ridges, or maybe large hills, it's not quite mountains at this point, that divide the land into almost just lateral slices. The furthest south of these mountain ranges has a town on the top of it called Nazareth. This is where Jesus lived, grew up, spent his life. His family moved there after he was born, down in Bethlehem. There's a whole lot of speculation as to why Nazareth, there's jobs, opportunities nearby, lots of things to think about there. But long story short, this area is still, it's not highly populated in Jesus' day. In the Old Testament, there's not a whole lot that goes on in this area, and yet it still is part of the land of Israel. These mountain ranges and the hills and valleys between them provide some access to and from the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea, but really, there's not a whole lot of travel that goes that way. Eventually there will be some exports that come out of the Sea of Galilee and take that route, but the Sea of Galilee and its immediate surroundings is a little bit more on the backwoods side of things. They do interact with the international world a bit, but at least Old Testament and early New Testament, Sea of Galilee and that surrounding area doesn't play as prominent a role. You may have heard Nazareth is not actually ever named in the Old Testament. It's just either a small enough town that it didn't make an impact on anything, or it just, quite frankly, didn't exist until somewhere between the Old Testament and New Testament. That does happen. Now, one of the interesting things that, as I've been looking at this map, I've just kind of been reflecting on things for a little bit. Another town just east of Nazareth caught my eye. I would say this is maybe 2 miles due east of Nazareth, a little town called Gath-Hepher. Deep biblical trivia stuff. Which prophet was from Gath-Hepher?
Can you spell that?
Gathhepher.
Is it Amos?
No.
Ours is a peppers.
Yeah. Jonah was from the town of Gath-Hepher.
Really?
And again, I'd never noticed this before, but on this very same mountain ridge, a couple miles away, Jesus would have been able to, as a boy, say, "Oh yeah, Jonah was right there, and let's teach you the story of Jonah." Rabbis probably did that. So when Jesus identifies during his ministry with Jonah and say, "the sign of Jonah," he says, "Oh, well, we're from the same place. We're from right nearby." So that adds just that extra layer of connection here. You will notice this as we go along, not tonight necessarily as much, but as we go through our series. New Testament events, where they take place, is important. Because there are oftentimes Old Testament events that take place there too. And when you read those two events together and watch them play out, that Old Testament event will give you information as to what's going on in the New Testament event as well. And so there are lots of really cool stuff that we're going to get into with Galilee. We'll come back to the Sea of Galilee and some other stuff from then on. But right now, any questions on Upper Lower Galilee?
I missed out. Lower Galilee, can you point that out again?
Lower Galilee is kind of this section here, basically where it says Galilee.
Okay.
Immediately to the left of that is Upper Galilee. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, moving north to south, the next geographic feature here is kind of this chunk right here. On your maps, it gets a little greener. It's just kind of a triangle shape here known as the Jezreel Valley. The Jezreel Valley. It's called the Jezreel Valley, first and foremost, because it's a valley. And one of the cities that's kind of right in the center, it kind of plays a pretty prominent role, is the city of Jezreel. Put a sticky note there if that helps. Jezreel, kind of the center of this valley. Yeah. The Jezreel Valley is a surprisingly fertile area in the midst of a whole bunch of mountain ranges. You've got the hill that Nazareth is on there. This is Mount Carmel that reaches into kind of the area of Samaria. There's a Mount Gilboa up here. And the Jezreel Valley is kind of nestled in there. Practically speaking, today in Israel, that's where the military has an airstrip. Because this is one of the few places with a level enough location for them to put something like that. So the Jezreel Valley plays a very important role in not just today's day and age, but in the ancient world. The Jezreel Valley here was the site of actually quite a number of military battles. Because again, you're thinking, all right, where can you practically assemble an army that can fight other people? If you're on mountains, that makes it a lot more difficult. But if you're able to line up your troops, send them back and forth towards each other, the Jezreel Valley is where that's all going to take place. The Jezreel Valley is lined up kind of right up against Mount Carmel. That little kind of point of Israel, that horn of Israel that juts out, that's the start of the Carmel range, and it goes along the Jezreel Valley. This is, again, a mountain range. It's, again, another challenge in navigating the terrain of Israel here. To get from these coastal plains here that we'll talk about here into the Jezreel Valley, you've got to cross the Mount Carmel range at some place. In the ancient world, there are 3 passes through that mountain range, and probably the most important one is this one kind of right in the center of the Jezreel Valley. The town there is called Megiddo. And so the plains of Megiddo, sometimes the Jezreel Valley is called the plains of Megiddo. The valley of Har Megiddo, the valley of Armageddon, Revelation comes along and says that's where the final battle is going to take place. The valley of Har Megiddo, of Armageddon. They're pulling in this image of this is the valley where military things take place. This is the valley that great battles take place in. We've got records outside of our Old Testament that the Egyptians come and fight battles here. We've got records in the Old Testament that the Israelite kings fight the Judahite kings, and they together fight the Egyptians. Right here in the Jezreel Valley, Crusades took place, big battles in the Jezreel Valley. World War I, there were battles that took place in the Jezreel Valley. We have all of these battles just historically over the course of time that take place in here, and the book of Revelation takes those images and says, all right, in the place where we fight battles, there's going to be a battle to fight, and God's going to win once and for all. And so there's all sorts of points of connection there with Mount Carmel and Jezreel Valley. Probably the most prominent example of events that take place in these 2 locations is from 1 Kings chapter 18. If you got your Bibles, 1 Kings 18. This is, well, first of all, you remember the big event of Mount Carmel is what prophet? Now, this is Elijah and the prophets of Baal, takes place on top of Mount Carmel. So we're going to pick up that story immediately after those events. So Elijah has prayed to God, God has answered, and then they kill all the prophets of Baal. It's a pretty picture there. Verses 41 and following here gives us what happens next.
What chapter? 17?
18.
Okay, thank you.
1 Kings 18, starting at verse 41. Elijah said to Ahab, he's the king of Israel at this point, "Go up, eat and drink, for there's a sound of rushing rain." So Ahab went up to eat and drink. Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel. He bowed himself down to the earth, put his face to his knees, has all these prayers here, says his servant up and down. And eventually, verse 45, "In a little while the heavens grew black with clouds and wind. There was a great rain, and Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. The hand of the Lord was on Elijah. He gathered up his garment and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel." So they've got the showdown at Mount Carmel, not just Elijah and the prophets of Baal, but now Elijah says, all right, God's going to show up here, and he's going to tell us when rain's coming. So Elijah is praying at the top of Mount Carmel. King Ahab's off eating. Finally they say, all right, it's coming. So now we've got to get back to Jezreel. Because if we don't get there in time, this whole valley here is going to get swampy. Because it's the lowlands, because there are mountains on every side, where is the water going to go? In the bowl that's in between them. So Elijah is able to run very quickly, gets there ahead of Ahab. There's some theories there that Ahab was even slowed down because he got caught up in the rain. Got muddy for him and his chariot, bogged down his tires, and so he didn't get there as quickly as Elijah did. The geography of this matters. Going down a mountain, I mean, how can someone outrun someone in a chariot? Well, first of all, the hand of the Lord is on Elijah here. But second of all, the geography plays a role in that. If rain is coming, where is it going to go? It's going to go in the Jezreel Valley where Ahab has to ride. And it's going to slow him down along the way. Enough sense for us to keep moving? All right, moving again further south here, you've got this big chunk of territory that we're going to try to look at now west to east. So this area of Judea and Samaria here, you can pretty evenly split it into layers now from north to south, and we're going to try to piece it all together, get a big chunk of territory out of the way here. So we're going to start with the coastal plains here. Almost immediately south of Mount Carmel is the Sharon Plain. Sometimes it's just Sharon in the Bible, the Plains of Sharon, the Flower of Sharon. This whole section here. On your map, it's essentially down to where that river is flowing. It's not a river, we'll talk about that later. Roughly divided there between the Sharon Plain and then what follows is the coastal plain. The Bible will specify either the plains of Sharon or the coastal plain here. This is the area of territory that's right against the Mediterranean Sea. So soil there is a little bit sandier. Occasionally it can be marshy and hard to pass. And yet the land is flat. Or at least flatter than anywhere else in the land of Israel. It is much more easily navigable than some of the other places that we will see here. But there's a balance here. If you're right up against the sea, there's sand dunes, there are different obstacles that you need to pass. Right in the middle is where it gets marshy, but you don't want to go too far east and head into the hills and have to do climbing. And so as trade routes pass through there, they'll kind of hug the eastern part of this coastal plain, the Sharon Plain here, and try to get a little bit of both worlds here as they're interacting with the people around them, the land around them. We'll talk a little bit more in detail later on here, but the coastal plain is essentially where the Philistines live. As much as this territory is allotted to the people of Israel, the Philistines are there, and Very rarely are they ever actually driven out or brought into subjugation by the people of Israel, but the Philistines are down there and they play a pretty important role. Moving inland a little bit, you've got a chunk of territory here called the Shephelah. I've heard so many different pronunciations. Just that's the word. It's written in your. I've heard Shephelah, there's all sorts of things here.
Where is that again?
This is just east of the coastal plains before you get in kind of the hill country territory here.
Past the river.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. The Shephelah is, if I'm remembering right, it's literally the Hebrew word for lowlands. So we're moving away from the Mediterranean Sea, and we're not yet into the large mountain range sorts of places here, but the ground is starting to move up, and there's starting to be a little more difficulty passing through here. The Shephelah is especially important as it controls the access into Judea. So if you need to get to Jerusalem from the coast here, you've got to go through the Shephelah. And along the way there are a few valleys that you can kind of traverse and work your way through. We're not going to talk about all of them today, but there is one valley in particular that is going to be important here. This is the Elah Valley. It's closer to kind of the central part of Judea here. You pass through this and you can either turn left and go to Jerusalem or right and go to Hebron, which is another important city at the time. The Elah Valley is one of these access roads through the Shephelah. So as we hear in the Bible, there are events that take place in the Shephelah. The most important would be from 1 Samuel 17. 1 Samuel 17, again, there's a lot of place names here, so don't get too thrown off. 1 Samuel 17, the first 3 verses here. This is the battle that takes place between the people of Israel and the Philistines. They're set up shop, and instead of going at it directly, they each choose a champion. And the Philistines' champion, Goliath, comes out and mocks Israel until they are able to send someone into battle. The Philistines gathered their armies for battle. They were gathered at Sokah, which belongs to Judah, and they camped between Sokah and Azekah and Ephes-Dammim. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountains on one side. Israel stood on the mountain on the other side with a valley between them. Whoever recorded this gave us all the details. Alright, so here's the city of Sokah that the Philistines are camped in. The Israelites are kind of down in the valley of Elah, and also they're camped on the other mountain on the other side of the valley. And when they come up to meet, it's right in the middle. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I always pictured, David and Goliath, maybe just opposite sides of the field. It wasn't anything too crazy. But these are 2 mountains. And you're going one-on-one down in the valley. Again, practical military stuff. You want to stay on top of a mountain. It's easily defendable. But if you're coming down to fight just one-on-one, they're going down in this valley here, the Elah Valley with Sokah on one side, and Ephes-Dammim, which, if I remember right, means 2 gates. And they've, on the other hill apart from Sokah, they've just discovered a camp that has 2 gates. It's likely this one. So it's interesting to watch this play out. Now the Shephelah is interesting because it's again this area that needs to be defended, and yet the people of Israel don't always take it. There is safety when they are further inland, further to the east in the hill country, harder to get to. You can kind of do what you want there. But if you want to interact with the trade routes that are going through, you've got to push your way through the Shephelah into the coastal plains. There's danger in that, because if people know you're there and you've got money, well, where are they going to go? Well, where there's money. But if you want some of that money coming along the trade route, what do you got to do? You got to step out there. Later on, King Solomon will have to build up some cities, fortify some cities, and he does them really along the trade routes going through the area. He builds up the city of Ekron. I think it's Gezer, pardon me. Builds up Gezer, Megiddo, and Hazor, cities that are along this trade route, because he wants some of that money. And we hear Solomon does get a lot of money. He's pretty wealthy, able to manage things well. And in order to do that, he has to go through the Shephelah. There are other cities that are important here. When Israel falls, it falls because people come through the Shephelah and take over. It's an important place. Beyond the Shephelah is this central hill country here that both Samaria and Judea are kind of situated on the heartlands.
What's the height of these mountains?
Jerusalem is roughly 2,500 feet above sea level. It's not the highest one around there, but it's pretty average, I would say, for some of this area.
Like Mount Carmel and these things?
I don't have Mount Carmel and some of these other hill ranges off the top of my head. I was going to look up Mount Hermon, we'll talk about in a moment. That's going to be the highest one of any of these around. The Dead Sea, though, is the lowest elevation anywhere on earth. So they're 16, 17 miles away from Jerusalem. Jerusalem's about 2,500 above. Dead Sea's 1,600 or so below. There's a lot of elevation change that happens very rapidly. Not just from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea, but all throughout here. Lots of hills, lots of valleys, lots of mountains to pass.
Mount Carmel is just under 1,800 feet.
Mount Carmel, 1,800.
Which that would be pretty noticeable given proximity to the sea.
Yes. Yeah. If I remember right, in the Egyptian sources, they talk about passing Mount Carmel and they call it the antelope's nose. Because it's just apparently the shape of an antelope's nose sticking out into the Mediterranean Sea. All right, so we're in this heartland. The hill country is often what is called of Judea and Samaria. This is probably the place that most of the action, especially in the Old Testament, takes place. Jerusalem is right here. It is almost due west of the top of the Sea of Galilee, that north of the Sea of Galilee. Let me see if I can toss a sticky note on there in case that is helpful for you. Jerusalem is right there, west of the Sea of the Dead Sea. And not too far south of there, only 5-6 miles as the bird flies, is Bethlehem. Jerusalem and Bethlehem are very close together. A little bit further south, a city that's more important in the Old Testament is Hebron. Abraham spent some time there. A lot of the battles that we read about during the time of the kings, some of time before David becomes king, takes place in this area. The time of the conquest, there's a lot of battles there. The judges got stuff going on over there as well. This hill country here of Judea and Samaria is kind of the safe place for the people of Israel, probably both north and south, Israel and Judah. Jerusalem would not exist as a major hub, the city that it is today, if God hadn't intervened. There's really not a whole lot that is valuable about the city of Jerusalem. It's not on a major trade route. It's really hard to get to. Yeah, sure, there's a water source, and it is on a hill, but there are higher hills around it. Had God not intervened and had Abraham nearly sacrificed Isaac here and kind of built the temple here and all these things, Jerusalem wouldn't really be all that important. And yet God uses this to kind of be the center, the heart of God's people off in the land of Israel. When the kingdom divides north and south. You've got Jerusalem here as the capital of the south. Eventually, a little city called Shechem is made the capital of Israel to the north. It's, again, hill country, out of the way, hard to get to. Now there's a valley you can travel to get through and another somewhat nearby valley to pass through, but again, it's off the beaten path. It's a little bit harder to get to, and it provides a little more safety and security than some of these other places. Now God has told His people, here's your land, go conquer it. And sometimes they do, but more often than not, they don't. It's safe to hide in these rocks. Safe to just stay up here on these mountains rather than actually go into this land where it's a little more dangerous. To the coastlands, the Philistines are there. There's more enemies around. We're going to have to interact with those that don't look like us, don't sound like us, all these foreigners passing through. God calls them to do this. How often they are faithful to God's call is not always in their favor. Let's just say it like that. So, we've got, we're moving to the east here, coastal plains in Sharon, the Shephelah, Samaria, and Judea in the hill country. Just east of Judea, before you get to the Dead Sea, there's this little section called the Wilderness of Judah. The Wilderness of Judah follows next. Again, between the hill country and the Dead Sea, it is an area where it starts to become very dry, even drier than it already is. And you look out,
Is that the Judean wilderness?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, the Judean wilderness. This is, cities have been left behind. There is water that passes through, but most of it passes through underground at this point. These mountain ranges provide a good block for most of the rain that's coming from west to east, and there's not a whole lot of rain that happens over there. And so instead, it's just dry, it's barren, and there's essentially nothing. You've got a few cities here on in the hill country, but you leave Bethlehem 3-4 miles, again Jerusalem maybe 5 or 6 miles, and there's nothing until you're pretty close to the Dead Sea, because it is hilly, it is dry, it is barren, and it is inhospitable. Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is baptized somewhere along the Jordan River here. Chances are somewhere to the south end of the Jordan River. Matthew 4 verse 1. Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Well, what wilderness is nearby? It's this wilderness of Judea. Placed just nearby. Now, again, this is not a pleasant place to be. And when Jesus is wandering around without food or water for 40 days, you can easily imagine that taking place in this Judean wilderness, the wilderness of Judea. It's not a place you want to get lost. Jesus is out there by himself among the hills and the rocks. There's a little bit of sand, but it's like a dirty sand. It's a different situation there. That's where Jesus spends his time for those 40 days till finally he comes out. Lots of stuff going on there. Any questions before we keep moving east?
With the Dead Sea, I know it does not have fresh water flowing into it, so is it stagnant?
So, the Dead Sea has fresh water flowing into it, but it itself is not fresh water. We'll talk about that here. That's the next thing for us to talk about. You're just on top of things. All right, so the next section, if we're moving west to east, is going to be the Rift Valley. And it is this section of land that starts up here, just at the base of Mount Hermon, and it goes south all the way through, this is the Hula Basin, the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, Dead Sea, the Arabah, down to the Gulf of Aqaba in the south. This is really a crevice that happens in the land, and it's this big, long valley that runs the entire length of the country. It provides a pretty natural line of demarcation, a good border that happens quite often amongst the different places in different countries that interact in the biblical world. So it starts off here. Way to the north is Mount Hermon, highest mountain in the area. I don't have numbers. I don't know if you've looked that one up yet.
10,000.
10,000? Roughly 10,000 feet above sea level. High mountain. Pretty tall. There are some that speculate that this is either the place where Jesus gives a sermon on the mount. He goes up on a mountain to teach. I don't think that's as plausible. There are others that say that this is where he's transfigured, which is a possibility. The other traditional location is down here between the lower Galilee and the Jezreel Valley. The other thought is that maybe Mount Hermon is the place where Jesus ascends into heaven. Again, I think better reading of the text says Mount of Olives, but different people say different things. Mount Hermon is right there to the north, and as soon as you get down off of that mountain, you run into this Hula Valley. You'll see it spelled different ways. This is the traditional way, H-U-L-E-H. If you're looking up things today, it might just be hula as in the hula dance. That's how they would spell it. The Hula Valley, just north of the Sea of Galilee. In Jesus' day, there was a lake there, Lake Hula. In today's day and age, that lake is dried up. They're pulling out water for other things. But this is essentially where the headwaters of the Jordan River is. So snow melts on top of Mount Hermon, and water falls on either side of this valley, and it all funnels into this middle area here. There's a lot of marshiness going on here. It's hard to pass through, so you got to be on one side of this or the other. But this is where the headwaters of the Jordan River start coalescing until it flows into the Sea of Galilee. Now, Sea of Galilee is about 680 feet below sea level. Sea of Galilee is actually... Sorry, I've got in my notes different numbers here. I've got written down 260. I think 680 was more accurate. I don't know. I might be wrong. In any case, Sea of Galilee, 13 miles north to south, about 7.5 miles wide, depending on who's counting and how they're doing it. You go to Israel today, and the Sea of Galilee is the Sea of Galilee. Now, you're going to see jet skis on the Sea of Galilee now that you wouldn't have a couple thousand years ago. But whereas you see cities being built up, whole environments being changed, this geography doesn't change. Sea levels rise and fall a little bit. Some of the towns around come and go, and there's earthquakes in the area that messes some stuff up, but that's the Sea of Galilee. The cities that are around there that we'll talk about in a few minutes here, they're the same cities.
215 meters, which is 686 feet.
Okay, all right. So 680 feet was the more accurate number. Good. Yes. Yeah.
30 miles from the Mediterranean Sea to that's quite the dam.
Yeah. Because even between here and there, elevation rises before it falls. So the Sea of Galilee is essentially its own, again, little bowl that takes place here as part of this larger Rift Valley. Again, weather normally comes from west to east, but when squalls happen, it's when there's hot air up here that rushes down into the Sea of Galilee and causes storms on the lake. When I was there last time, we were out on the Sea of Galilee, and I'm trying to describe this very situation, and I'm feeling winds coming from the east, and I got to be messed up on this, because winds normally come from the west, and we're not in the middle of a squall here, are we? And that night there was a squall, and so I'm going to be more confident next time in wind directions here. But that's what happens on the Sea of Galilee. With how it's situated, it is a pretty unique thing that takes place. Sea of Galilee, not mentioned in the Old Testament. I think there's one passing reference to Kinneret, the city of Kinneret, which is, in the Old Testament, sometimes it would be called the Sea of Kinneret, or maybe it's the New Testament calls it that. In any case, not much happens here, Old Testament-wise. It's a border, and that's about it. They don't spend a whole lot of time on ships, fishing. It's just not a big deal in the Old Testament. From there, you go further south and you get the Jordan River and the Jordan River Valley that goes along south of that. The Jordan River travels from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. Again, as the crow flies, it's about 65 miles. If you were on a boat traveling this distance, you'd travel 135 miles to get from one to the other. The Jordan River is very twisty and turny. It does not go in a straight line, as you know. That's how rivers work. But it is even more so as you go along. It's in certain places it looks like a creek. It's not much anything. Other places it's pretty wide. It can be hard to pass. But the place where Jesus is traditionally said to have been baptized. The Jordan River is probably from where I'm standing to probably just a little bit past you, Bob. That's it. You can go down into the water, and then they've got a barrier in the water that if you cross that line, the Jordanian soldiers on the other side will shoot, and vice versa. And that's it. It's not much. Certain places it's dark and muddy and not a pleasant river. And yet, the Jordan River is very important because it floods every year with the rain that melts from Mount Hermon, enters the Sea of Galilee, and goes along, and it provides good nutrition, good soil for the land around it. So later on, we should be able to look up Lot and Abraham. When they separate, Abraham and Lot have just come from the Negev desert area. Lot looks at the land around the Jordan River Valley and says, that's good land. That's where you can actually grow stuff. That's where you can graze your sheep and stuff. So that's where he goes. And he gets in trouble that way too. But this is a much more fertile area. However, again, there are very few places that you can cross this river. As much as there are dinky places along the way, you got to find them. Especially in the ancient world, if you're traveling with an army, with a whole group of people, there are only a few places along the way where you can cross. I think one of these weeks we'll spend some time looking at one of the crossings and what takes place along the way. But Jordan River is a big deal here. That Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea itself, again, I'm not confident in my numbers now, 1,310 feet below sea level, 1310.
I just looked it up, and it says 1412.
1412, yeah.
So it says it's been the shore level,
this is true.
Water level's been declining.
Yeah,
So
the question is when they measured that. You've got this picture of the Dead Sea in your mind. That's not what it looks like today. The Dead Sea today, all the edges of it have shrunk, and about here, the Dead Sea is cut into two. There's technically a channel that links the two, and they will pump water from the main body of the Dead Sea into this bottom area, but they've got it all kind of lined out, dredging up salt, as they're pumping it out of the Dead Sea into this other area, so it we'll spread it thin, and the water will evaporate, and we can produce all these Dead Sea salt products. That's how they do it today. Water levels today are a matter of conflict and controversy. Who controls it? Who gets to take what out? As with any water levels in most places. Dead Sea is lowest spot on Earth, so everything drains into it. Nothing comes out of it except for what evaporates, meaning whatever minerals there are stuck there. They say today if you drink a quarter cup of water from the Dead Sea, you yourself will die, because it's filled with so much chemical, not chemicals, but naturally occurring elements that will kill you. I want to say arsenic and sulfur and all sorts of stuff. The salt alone, yeah. It's a lot. That being said, you go and sit in the water and you float, because just you yourself as a human being, which are 70% water, something like that, we are less salty than the Dead Sea is, so we float. It's an interesting phenomena. If you have a paper cut anyway, you will find out.
Have you done this? Have you been in it?
Yeah. It's an experience, I'll tell you that. It just feels a lot different than normal water too, just a little slimy almost, just because of how salty it is. Dead Sea is very inhospitable, which is interesting because the book of Ezekiel we just finished a couple weeks ago in our Inwardly Digest stuff talks about water flowing from the temple in Jerusalem, pouring into the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea becomes fresh. And there's a vibrant fishing industry that takes place there. Even this deadest of dead places, this most inhospitable sea, will not provide an obstacle for God. He'll take care of it. All right, moving south, you've got this area known as the Arabah. Again, not much happens here. We could almost do away with this half of the map and be fine. This is desert. It is unpleasant. You've got this valley along the way that is it's part of this Rift Valley, but that doesn't mean it's fertile or green like it is along the Jordan River here. It's still dry. It's still arid. It is unpleasant. It is inhospitable. I think on this map we've got 5 cities here, and then there is nothing until you get down to the very, very far south. Yes?
In this map here, it says the Arabah is between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Between Gilead and Samaria.
The Arabah?
That's what that word looks like.
Yeah, I would not put the Arabah there. I don't know why they have. Arabah is much further south. So I'll have to look into that. It's possible that there's multiple places called Arabah, but that's this section here. Again, not much happens there. There's a few raids. The people of Israel have to pass through there as they're traveling, but that's that. So finally, again, you get the Gulf of Aqaba down here. There's one city here, Elah, E-L-A-H, or Elah, sometimes A-T-H. In any case, there is, I think, one reference to this place in the Old Testament. Solomon sends people here to get gold or bring gold back or something like that as part of his trade route. This Gulf of Aqaba leads into the Red Sea, which leads into a couple other places, eventually spits you out in the Indian Ocean. So this is the point of connection between Israel and any points further east if Israel was a maritime kind of country. They don't do that. It is interesting. In Israel's history, they're very much a land-based people, not a sea-based people. This is different than like England and Spain. We think of their great shipping expeditions along the way. Even Greeks, Romans, they have ships. They have these fleets that they go places with. Israel, they stay in their hill country. The Philistines did. One of the theories is that they came from the area of Greece, somewhere around there. They're called the Sea Peoples in other texts. So yeah, they definitely have a more greater connection to the sea. All right, 2 other places of major areas, and we've got to keep flying through this because we're almost out of time. So we've got main chunk here, west to east. The next big section further south is this area known as the Negev. Depending on your translation, they might put it Negeb with a B instead of a V. It's the same letter in Hebrew. It depends on whether you have a hard stop with your lips or kind of buzz it a little bit, Negev. In any case, the word Negev means dry. And as you might expect, it's dry. There's not much there. Again, I mentioned that Abraham spends some time in the Negev. We'll go back to Genesis 13 here. Abraham went up from Egypt. This is one of his times that he and Sarai go down there. He comes up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, Lot with him, and they came into the Negev.
Egypt's that?
Egypt is down on this map. It's west, kind of southwest. Yeah. He journeys on for a while. He goes from the Negev to Bethel, a little bit north of where Jerusalem is, and that's eventually where they split. Lot chooses the Jordan River Valley, and Abraham says, "All right, I'll go back to the Negev. I'll travel around in the hill country," and that's where that all takes place. Once you pass the Negev, you've got this area that's just called the wilderness. There's not much there. If the Negev was bad, the wilderness is even worse. This is the place of the wilderness wanderings. So for 40 years, Israel has been here. They come out of Egypt, and they're here. They're not in the Promised Land. They're just nearby. This is something that, when I first learned of this, it's kind of crazy. I mean, they say that the state of New Jersey has about the same area of land as Israel. So this is, you're just across the border of New Jersey into Delaware, whatever the next state is. You can see it. You can interact with people who are passing through. But you yourself, no, you can't go in. You got to wander in this place for years and years and years. And again, when it's time to go in, they can't just march in a straight line up and take control of the land. First of all, because there are, different people living here that make it more difficult. Eventually, the Edomites don't let them pass through their territory, so they got to go down, around, up, and over into Moab and travel along there. They fight some battles along the way. But it is a roundabout journey for them to get where they want to go. So, that's the land of Israel, just geographically speaking. There's a lot going on here. You've got some very fertile areas, you've got some very mountainous areas, you've got everything in between, and it impacts the story. It impacts the text. It clarifies some decisions of why people go where they go. We're going to track out some battles that take place here and who goes where and why are they making what strategic decisions and who's risking what by traveling what mountain range, and there's all sorts of stuff that goes on there. Just in brief passing here, we've talked about most of the major cities here. I'll add some enemy territory here. We talked about Philistia here, the coastal plains. The Phoenicians are to the north, again, right along the Mediterranean. On your map, there's just that little bit of a pop-out that's not too far south of where that the measuring line is. That's the city of Tyre. Almost sticks out into the Mediterranean. You can almost hardly see it on this map. But Tyre is one of the two big Phoenician cities. This is where Jezebel is from. King Ahab makes an alliance with the king of Tyre, or the Phoenicians there, and they are enemies that are in the place there. Historically, other enemies here, it would be Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Ammon is in this territory on the northeast shore of the Dead Sea. The next kind of little chunk comes with Moab and then Edom. It's actually really convenient. You've got these, looks like rivers flowing through there. You can divide up the territory that way. They are natural boundaries. So Ammon, Moab, and Edom, the three big ones there. We've talked about Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth. It is worth highlighting here the evangelical triangle. These three cities, Bethsaida, Capernaum, and Chorazin. Bethsaida is somewhere on the northeast shore of the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum is still pretty close by here, almost exactly north of the Sea of Galilee. And Chorazin is even a little bit closer, just right there. Let's see if I can do this. I can sometimes make a little party hat on top of the Sea of Galilee, and that's the evangelical triangle. Most of Jesus' ministry takes place in this small little section of land on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. What you see there, that's it. Most of Jesus' teaching, his miracles, the Sermon on the Mount, feeding of 5,000, most of it takes place in this little party hat on top of the Sea of Galilee. It's not much land, it's not much geography, and yet he does travel, he does other things, but a lot of it takes place just right there. In Matthew's Gospel, when Jesus speaks all the woes, he says, "Woe to you, Bethsaida, to Capernaum, woe to you, Chorazin. The miracles that had been done in you were done in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented, or maybe it's Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago." Very interesting that it's just all so close together there. We've already marked Shechem. The last two cities to mark out are Dan, which is way up to the north there, just at the foot of Mount Hermon, and then Beersheba, right here, smack dab in the middle of the Negev. Beersheba, Dan. I did not write down the reference here, but in the Old Testament, quite often they'll talk about all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba did this, or they gathered together, or they agreed to whatever, or they went to war. These two cities tend to be the extent of Israel proper, God's people proper. There are people across the Jordan, that's that Transjordan, I kind of skipped over that one, all the other stuff. There are some tribes that go up there, but by and large, it is the people of Israel that are in Galilee, the coastal plains, if there are any, the Shephelah, the hill country, a little bit into the wilderness. That's about it. This is the playing board that most of Scripture plays out on. Most of the Gospels, well, almost completely the Gospels take place here. And so it's important for us to know what we're dealing with and see how it all plays together.
So where did you say Shechem was?
Shechem is about right here, so middle of the hill country. If you, on your map you see you've got a little bit of green that juts into this section of yellow. It's just south of the end of that. Yeah, that's where Shechem is. That's the capital of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel. All right. If this is of interest to you, I will point you to two resources. First one goes together here. This is the Land Between. It is a study guide for this set of maps. This is the student map manual, a whole bunch of sets of maps. This book walks you through how to mark up a map, trace out what's happening in the Bible, and it will say, all right, draw this line between these two places. Now read in the text what just happened. Both of these are out of print, and they are very hard to find, but occasionally they'll be on Amazon, eBay, things like that. This is the best resource out there. This is what I learned on. They have updated it to a new thing, biblical backgrounds. It's the same thing, but they've got a regional study guide you got to print out, and then far fewer maps, but larger maps that, again, it walks you through, mark up, follow, read along this, and trace it all out. In my opinion, these are a lot busier, a lot more cumbersome to work with, but it's what's out there. So if you want to take a look at these, feel free to do so. That's about all I got for you tonight. Any questions or thoughts on stuff we've covered so far?
So did you have tests in seminary? Here it is, and you had
Yes.
to label and...
Yep. It was not one of the core classes, but while I was there was a congregation out in California that their pastor was big into the whole Israel trip, and he started a program that is now just thriving now at the seminary. Every year they take a class to Israel, and you learn all of this. You do all the map work ahead of time. There are tests. You build lesson plans based on all this. It is quite the experience. Yeah.
How many times have you been there?
Let's see, 5 times.
So when you go, do you have a road atlas? Do you have something that overlays the historical sites? Or,
so
I imagine you're pretty into the map when you're there. Right?
I am pretty. I try to do as much as I can beforehand, just so I don't have to carry a big old atlas as you're touring and things like that. But there's First couple times I wasn't as big into this. It was the third trip with a seminary that was really intense into this. The next time I did a lot of prep work, and then the fifth time was the last time I was the one who led the tour. So I dug into all of this beforehand. We did a series of classes like we're going to do here in preparation for Israel, getting ready to go. You go with a tour company, they know most places. I'd love to just go on my own and grab an atlas, rent a car, but most of the time nowadays you're with a tour group, just following that itinerary.
You could be a cheerleader, a tour leader for us. And
once things settle down, we will see. All right. As you got questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll wrap up tonight with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.